She could very well be the dark horse, and she could very well walk away from this year of F1 Academy as the champion. Hello, and welcome back to Shh, the Girls Are Racing. My name's Miranda, and this is a show all about women in motorsport, but particularly about F1 Academy. And we today are going to be talking about all things Montreal, the Canadian Grand Prix that has just happened, and we're going to be talking about the second and third races, which were the equivalent of the two races that the girls would have had if Miami hadn't been cancelled. So in this one, I just want to talk about the weekend as a whole, all the things that happen off track, as well as the two races and qualifying. So before I want to start, I guess we'll talk about just some of the little random things that happened. For example, Montreal was announced for 3 more years as an F1 Academy race round, which I thought was really cool because it shows the kind of solidifying presence of F1 Academy that it's having these deals being made. I thought it was really funny that a couple of times a boat was used to transport people. There's this kind of funny picture of Susie Wolf on a boat being taken to like the F1 Academy paddock. I don't know, I just wanted to include that. I thought it was kind of funny. They had 2 new sponsors, which one was Wella, which is like a hair care brand, and they ended up taking over the F1 Academy car, which is driven by Joanne Seconte, and they had a red livery. She was in a red suit. It was so cool. I will throw up a ton of pictures. She looked amazing. I loved the whole branding, the marketing behind it that they put on socials, and I loved the car. The second sponsor was Gatorade, and they were sponsoring the wild card for this race, who was Matilda Patz. She's from Germany, and she's quite new as well to single-seaters. She's had some experience, but not a whole lot. She's quite young too. I thought she was really, really good in this round that she was in the 3 races that she was in, but we'll talk about her a little bit later. But Gatorade essentially came on board as a proper sponsor of F1 Academy, from what I can understand. I think that's really cool for them to have ongoing support. I think they're also sort of becoming a sponsor of like the F1 brand as well. I'm not quite sure, but I'll correct myself if I'm wrong. But basically, I thought it was really cool for them to have another new sponsor. The more sponsors, the better. I went on about this last time, but like, yeah, how good is it? Anyway, another huge talking point of the weekend was Maya Berg's electrical issues. She had technical issues with her car, and that carried on. I think they fixed it either for the second race or for the third race, but it essentially very much hampered her weekend because it also really wrecked her qualifying. She qualified P15, and obviously that doesn't even improve for the reverse grid race. So that's a really, really difficult position to be in when you're leading the championship, especially only by 1 point. So it was a really unfortunate time for this to happen to her, and also it was through no fault of her own. It's just some issue. In qualifying, when I tuned in, basically the commentator said they'd replaced the sensors in the car, they'd replaced the engine. They quite literally did everything to try and fix that issue for qualifying, but it just didn't work, and that resulted in a really poor qualifying from her. So yeah, I guess you'd say that that was a very big talking point. The commentators spoke about it a lot. They were quite focused on her in race 3, which we'll get to later, but it meant she didn't have a great qualifying. I guess that the top 2 are not a huge surprise. It was Chloe Chambers followed by Alicia Palmovsky, followed by Dorianne Pan. It's actually becoming sort of a semi-regular lineup that we see. Chloe Chambers is really collecting those pole position points that they give in F1 Academy. But it was interesting, that sort of top 3 and the rest of the grid for that matter, it was secured within the last 5 minutes, which I probably makes a lot of sense, to be really honest. But it was quite interesting because for the first 10 minutes or so of qualifying, we were seeing completely different people up in the top. And the top sort of 5 in the World Championship, those girls, they weren't actually performing that well at the start of qualifying, but then they really ramped it up, hit it out of the park, and we got kind of that expected qualifying list. But yeah, towards the first 10-15 minutes, Alba Larson was in P1 and she was constantly improving as well. Despite ending up eventually in P12. She was really, really performing quite well at the start, and even Leah Block, I think, at one point was in P1. So it was quite an interesting qualifying, despite it ending sort of how you'd expect, I guess. I guess one good thing, I kind of mentioned this in Miami, how Emma Felbermeyer kept getting sort of those P8s. Well, she ended in P6, so not only is that an improvement for her, but it meant that she wouldn't start on pole in the reverse grid race, which I thought was a good thing, so she can be sort of the hunter for once. And we'll get to that, of course we will. But basically, she started in P6. That's a really excellent result because it's better than the P8s that she'd been having before. And it also set her in good stead for the third race, the full points race for Canada. But even all throughout qualifying, throughout the 30 minutes, Maya Berg's electrical issues, as I said, had become apparent that they hadn't been solved and it became even more obvious in race 1, but they had not been solved despite the continuous checking, the continuous looking. At one point, even Susie Wolf was on camera sort of inspecting her car. I think just because you don't want to have a championship decided this way, she also wants to see Myberg's car fixed as soon as possible so she can be battling at the front if she can qualify well. But yeah, none of that ended up eventuating. But she ended up in P15, which was still pretty good. She still beat sort of 3 or so other drivers to get there despite her issues, which I think shows just how good she is. But I think it's worth noting as well that the wildcard, Matilda Patz, she qualified P14. So she also qualified above Myberg and above those 3 other girls. And I think that's quite incredible. As I said, she's quite young. She doesn't have much experience. And so for her to be coming here, and she had a lot of issues in free practice as well with her car, which meant she couldn't get that many laps in. And she commented on her story. I'll throw up the stories that she posted. But basically she commented that she thought she could do even better. And I was quite impressed. Like, this is a girl who's rocked up, and we haven't seen that great things from wildcards yet, but she's rocked up and she's done an incredible job. So I was really, really excited to see what happened for her this weekend. And she did stumble into a couple of issues, which I discussed in the previous video, and I'll also discuss here. But I think ultimately it was a really good showing of the talent that she has. She just needs a bit more experience and a bit more time, but it's clear to me that the talent is there. And the commentators were sort of discussing the wildcards are people that eventually could potentially have a spot on the F1 Academy grid. As we know, Alicia, Ella, Nina, these were all wildcards that have ended up finding their way onto the F1 Academy grid for this year. So it's possible that all these wildcards are competing to impress for a spot next year. I thought, despite the crashes, that she really actually did impress. And this section wouldn't be complete without me very quickly discussing Ella Lloyd, P4. She's improving all the time. She's so impressive. The commentators mentioned that she's currently P7 in British F4, which is pretty impressive as well. Just so excited for her. How this weekend went for her, I couldn't be more happy as an Ella Lloyd fan. But yeah, I think as a rookie, she is constantly impressing and doing really well. I also just wanted to mention that during qualifying and during some of the races too, they had this huge electric billboard at the hairpin turn, and they were playing ads for F1 Academy, the Netflix show, F1 The Academy, and I just thought that was so cool. I know the girls are super glued in, super focused, but how cool would it be to see your face on that billboard as you're going past? And even if they didn't see it because, you know, their heads are down, they're racing, they're focused and all these things. As a viewer, how cool is it to see this ad for these amazing women doing these incredible things whilst all of the amazing women who are racing go past in front of so many people who are watching digitally online and all the people that were there as well. I just thought that was so cool. And I think it's worth mentioning that Canada actually had some incredible support for F1 Academy. From my viewing perspective, I'm obviously not at the races, but I can see, you know, how full the stands are. And I would say the stands were packed for F1 Academy, in my opinion. I don't know if that's the result of the Netflix series or a general rise in support for women in F1 Academy, but I just thought it was so cool that the seats were almost packed out and everyone was enjoying the action, and that they could see those Netflix ads for the girls, because it just comes and feels like all this hard work is paying off and the series is getting the support it deserves. And it just felt like, to me as a viewer, just such a special moment. I'm such a fan of the Netflix series, what it does for F1 Academy, because I want to keep watching this for many years to come. So, on to the 2 races that were the proper part of the Montreal weekend, I guess you could say. So, the reverse grid race and the full points race. So, basically, I hadn't known about Emma Felbermeyer's disqualification until I turned on the reverse grid race. And I basically tuned in and they said, oh, yes, she's been disqualified for a technical infringement. I went, because as I mentioned in the previous video, I was so excited for her to be on the podium. I was so excited for that P3. It felt fully deserved. And after Miami, I couldn't help but think she was just one of the unluckiest drivers, up there with Aurelia Nobles, to be honest. But she was just so unlucky for everything that had happened, because car being underweight is completely not her fault either. That's her team's fault. So for that to have happened, I was so annoyed for her, but I was really, really hoping that she could pull something great out of the bag for this reverse grid race. And let me tell you, she did. It was awesome. She won the race. Oh, it was so good. Sorry for the spoilers. But she won the race. Jonathan Wheatley was once there again to watch her on the podium, and I just thought it was so cool. It was so deserved. This is what her season has been building up to, in my opinion, from the very start. Watching her improve has been incredible, and the improvements have been consistent, and they've been leaps and bounds. And that's all you want to see, is you want to see, especially the girls that have zero experience beforehand, and she's come just from karting. This is her first step up from karting. You want to see these girls who have that very little experience improve. You want to see them become just as good as the girls who already have that experience. And the only way they can do that is by continuing to race in every round, get better and better. And I feel like watching her improve, it's been so tangible, her improvements. For example, qualifying P6 this weekend when she was qualifying P8 or lower before. And to see her win, I just felt it was so deserved. I never really thought I would like or support Stake or a Stake driver, but here we are. She has their first podium and their first win of the year, so it's really impressive, and it's just something you love to see. It's like a feel-good story of the weekend, in my opinion. But I will say, something I love about the reverse grid races is the way that the girls who are reversed into, P6, P7, P8, how they make their way through the field. It can become really intense battling with the girls who are starting P1, P2, P3, and so on. In this race, Chloe Chong started on pole, which I think was quite surprising. Granted, we've seen Emma Felbermeyer start on pole 2 weekends in a row, so it was kind of different. But a P8, to be honest, from my perspective, was quite unexpected from Chloe Chong. But after how she raced in race 1, despite DNFing, I was really impressed and really looking forward to seeing what she can do. However, it became apparent that her car kind of wasn't all up to scratch. This was discussed after the race, but basically, I think it was Roden had come out and said that they repaired her car to the best of their abilities, but it wasn't in tip-top shape, if you will, before the race, but they just wanted to get her out there racing. I don't think she had kind of any points in the end, and that's obviously very frustrating, but they just wanted to get her out there racing, so the car wasn't in its sort of peak performance position due to that crash with Rafaela Ferreira in race 1, but both races happened on the same day, so that was just an unfortunate byproduct of the quick turnaround needed to fix that car. But I thought it was really admirable, the fighting that she did do, even though it didn't end up so well for her in the end. After watching race 1, I definitely had a lot of faith that she would do something great, and it sucks so much that it was just her car really holding her back. So Matilda Pats was also doing well in this race, like in the first lap, sort of. She'd gone up to P11 from P13, P14. I thought that was quite impressive, and we got to see some really good battling from those drivers in the top 8, as I mentioned. So Ella Lloyd had a crazy first few laps. So in lap 1, she'd gone up to P2, but then sort of fighting like the P5, the P3 position. And this is basically because Ella, Dorian, Chloe Chambers, they were all kind of getting into it because those two in particular were coming up behind Ella. And obviously those two girls are leading the championship. This is quite experienced racers, and they know they need these points to be up the top of the field. Even though it's reverse grid and the points are far less, they're still expecting to get a lot of points. So Ella was kind of battling in with them. So this race did have a safety car as well towards the end, and I think that apart from that really good battling right at the start that I mentioned, it was pretty quiet at the front actually. I don't think we saw too much action from there until the safety car, which I'll get into in a bit. But basically, after a little while, Nina Gaterman took the lead from Chloe Chong, and then Chloe Chong fell slightly down the leaderboard, and then Nina managed to get away pretty quickly from Emma Felbermeyer, from Ella Lloyd, and that was how the top of the race continued for much of the race. But where things were quite interesting was slightly lower down, and we even saw Alba Larson, who started in P12, up in sort of P8, P7 territory. So as I mentioned, the midfield became much more interesting in this race, and the front became a little bit more quiet. But we saw an epic overtake from Alba Larson on Alicia Palmovsky to go ahead of her, and she did end up finishing ahead of her in the race. And I thought that was just so impressive because I think Alicia, when she goes into battle with other drivers, has more times than not come out victorious. She is extremely talented, and a lot of the other drivers don't seem to come out on top when they go into battle with Alicia. And I would say that watching Alba overtake Alicia was incredible and once again showed her talent and that she's not afraid to put her elbows out and give it a go and send it down the line and see what kind of happens. But she's got the skill to actually make the overtake stick. And yeah, I just thought that was super impressive from Alba, coming from P12 up into the points in a very good, strong points finish in the race. And once again, I just was so impressed by Alba Larson. Who can walk away from these F1 Academy weekends not being impressed by Alba Larson? That is the real question. I think she's making a really, really strong case for herself for having a very, very good long career in motorsports. So that overtake happened in lap 7, but they continued battling for much of the race. And in lap 10, they even had contact when I believe Alba had fallen behind again and was trying to overtake. And basically, they kept going all the way until the end when Alba eventually finished ahead. But they were kind of fighting each other, and it was just so great to see neither of them give up and give us, as viewers, a really, really interesting race. I think the most controversial or the most talked about part of the race, at least in my opinion, would be the situation that happened between Ella Lloyd and Dorian Pan. They both seem to have cut a chicane, but Dorian's race engineer came on the radio and told her to give the position back. And a lot of people, including myself, including the commentators, were like, we don't think she has to give that position back because they both cut the chicane and it seemed like Dorian was ahead. It doesn't seem essentially that any unfair advantage was gained, but Prema made the call to ask her to give the place back, which she did, and she didn't then ever recover it. Ella and Dorian were having some fantastic battles. It was great for watching, but I don't think that after that moment she ever really got back at Ella. So that was a bit unfortunate because it kind of became the race that could have been for Dorian, because Ella ended up in P2 and Dorian ended in P4. So it's really kind of, I wonder what would have happened moment, because I personally still don't think Dorian should have given that place back. The two of them kept battling very ferociously throughout the whole race, and it was fantastic to watch. So this race was also 17 laps long, but it was possibly the cleanest race we've seen from F1 Academy so far. And that is why Alice Powell on commentary was, well, at least that's part of the reason I think she said that this was one of the best races of the season that she's seen. For me personally, I preferred race 1. I thought it was a little bit more dramatic, a little bit more interesting as a viewer, as a fan. But I can definitely see why people would say this was the best race of the season so far, because we had beautiful, clean, aggressive racing for the first 11 of those 17 laps. It was intense, but there were no crashes, there was not too much scuffling, and it was really good. And it was green flag the whole time, which for these girls, when they're gaining experience, no DRS, so full elbows out, that doesn't always happen. We did get a safety car in this race, but it happened quite late on, and I would say that ultimately all of those laps, the first 10 or so laps where everyone was within sort of a couple of seconds of each other, it kept the race really interesting and really intense, and it was very impressive and fun to watch, very engaging for sure. We did once again see some teammate battling between Aurelia Nobles and Maya Berg. We saw it in about laps 8 to 11, so it went on for a very, very long time. That racing was pretty intense to watch. They seemed sort of very on the edge the whole time. That's, 4 laps or so that they were quite intensely battling. But eventually they made contact and there really was no room for Aurelia, and so she got kind of squeezed out a little bit and she ended about 4 or so places behind Maya. So that was just a bit unfortunate, but it was very, very intense battling and really good to watch. From a fan view, I was kind of on the edge of my seat. Every time they cut back to them, I'd think, oh my God, who's going to take the place? And it probably slowed them both down a little bit, to be honest, to be battling so hard. But yeah, made for really good racing, in my opinion. So apart from that moment of controversy between Dorian and Ella, the other talking point of this race was sparked by an incident between Ava and Nicole Havridar. Basically, Nicole went spinning off and crashing out because of a touch between them. I believe it was at the hairpin turn. I could be wrong about that though. But basically that did spark a safety car. It was really unfortunate for Nicole, this being kind of her home race. She's from Vancouver, but it's still the Canadian Grand Prix. So it's very unfortunate to go out like that, and it being due to a teammate battle. But I suppose, again, it's just racing. These things happen and there's no DRS, so the overtakes have to be done just on pure grit. But this incident did spark a safety car. And all the cars, as we know what happens under safety car, all the cars bunched up. I basically wasn't sure whether this race would also end under safety car or not, but it didn't. And this is really important because it made that sort of last bit of the race extremely intense, because the cars were super bunched up, and this was for positions, this was for podiums, and this was for points. And basically, Nina Gaterman had been, as I said, quietly leading the race the whole time, pretty comfortably in front of Emma Felbermeyer and Ella Lloyd, and this just got obliterated very, very quickly. And eventually what we saw was Emma overtook Nina Gatorman, and then Ella did too. The other point of controversy in the race was that on the very last sort of, I want to call it a chicane, not quite sure if it's called a chicane, but on that last turn, Emma went sort of over it. And a lot of people in the comments were arguing about whether she had to give the place back or not. And in fact, they had to decide rather quickly. Normally they decide these types of things after the race, but they had to decide very quickly if she still had that position, because obviously the podium celebration was happening next. And eventually it was very quickly dealt with. They said it's fine, she gained no lasting advantage because she was already ahead. That is the decision that a lot of people had an issue with, because some felt that maybe if she hadn't gone over, then the other girls would have had the chance to overtake. But you know, it is what it is. They decided that's the outcome, and Emma Felbermeyer won the race. And it was so special. It was so nice to see her win a reverse grid race and do as well as she did. Ella Lloyd as well snuck past very cheekily into P2. She actually had a hat trick of P2s this round, which was really incredible. It shows just how consistent, how good she is. And for a rookie, she's climbing up there and capitalizing on other people's mistakes and just doing a fantastic job, and it's so good to see. I do feel a bit bad for Nina Gatorman though. That was another race that seemed like she was going to convincingly win that was taken away from her, like the first race in Shanghai. But basically in this one, I'll put a little story up. I'll just put a picture, so I don't think it captures it quite as well, but she had revealed in the post-race interviews that she is still carrying her back injury from when she sort of flipped into the barriers in testing in Saudi Arabia, which was many months ago now. But for her to still be carrying those back issues, it's so horrible to hear. You never want to hear like someone racing in pain or something like this, and for her to have to give up two positions because she was in so much pain she felt like she couldn't fight them. That sucks to hear as well. It's really good that she still ended up on the podium, because she definitely deserved it after having a really convincing, strong race at the front until that safety car. I think it's incredible personally that she's still been racing this whole time, carrying an injury as severe as that, and I think it's incredible the way she's been able to get back up and keep going essentially and keep racing. Despite losing that P1, I thought she still really deserved a podium, and I thought she still really did a good job. And who knows if, you know, she could have won if she wasn't carrying that back injury, and she could have fought Emma and Ella a bit more properly. I guess we'll never know. That's the truth of that. But it's really good to see her still up on the podium after she was kind of robbed of the podium celebration in the first race, because Emma was up there in P3 and spraying the champagne, and she eventually was disqualified. And I have to say, I fully understand why there's a lot of controversy with Emma's sort of going over that last chicane. I mean, I think her win was totally deserved after an incredible race that she had, but I get why there's controversy, because watching it, you're just like, oh, I don't know, did she have that advantage? And my heart rate was through the roof. I was like, oh no, what's happening? What's going on? Because I was worried we were going to see, because of that bunching up under safety car, that we were going to see some crazy spectacular crash, especially how we saw in the last race. But thankfully none of that happened, and it all ended very nicely. Jonathan Wheatley was once again there to support Emma at the podium celebrations, but this time in P1, which is so cool, so deserved. We saw Bianca's old performance coach. I only know this from the Netflix series. He had a bit of a role when it came to Bianca's storyline, talking about, you know, how she was distracted or she wasn't performing well, blah, blah, blah. But he was there at the podium what in McLaren gear for what I can only assume is to celebrate Ella's podium. And I was just thinking like, oh my God, if they're doing another Netflix series, what is he going to say about Ella? But to be honest, there's only good things to be said about Ella, because she is the rookie GOAT. And even if she's statistically not, she's my rookie GOAT, and that's all that matters. And the final thing to mention about race 2, which was the reverse grid race, is that Leah Block came from P10 to P8 to score points, which was lovely to see. So, on to race 3. This is where Maya Verg's technical issues were seemingly resolved, but we still had to see her make her way through the field in P15. And we did see that. She ended up in the points in a really good position, but it wasn't enough to protect her championship lead. She has fallen to P3 in the championship, which is difficult, especially when this wasn't her fault. And I think we'll see some continued great racing for her in the last 3 rounds. So, race 3 was 17 laps. It was full points, all to play for. Chloe Chambers, after a difficult race 1 and 2, was starting on pole and here to do something incredible to make up for that disaster of a 21st birthday that happened the day prior. As I said, the stands were packed. There seemed to be such great support for the series, and it was amazing to see. And I thought Canada had showed up in a way that No other country had showed up yet at an F1 Academy race, so that was just really cool to see when I was watching over here in Australia. So basically, in the first few laps, there was once again very intense battling, but Alicia Palmowski had an issue where she went off, and I think it was just a slight mistake. But who was there to immediately capitalize on it but Dorian Pan and Ella Lloyd, right? It became a very quick dodging game because Ella and Dorian had to very quickly get out of the way the issue that she had where she just went off. But yeah, basically they capitalized on it very well. They got around the incident quite well, so it didn't necessarily affect them too much. And even past that incident, Ella was able to keep her P2 and Dorian kept the P3. Dorian actually qualified higher than Ella, but I think almost straight off the bat, Ella was quite a bit stronger at the start, and so she managed to get ahead of Dorian where she would stay for the rest of the race. In lap one, we did have an issue where basically the wildcard Matilda Patch, she misjudged a turn and she spun and she hit Ava. And that was really unfortunate because they're technically high-tech teammates. All the wildcards race in a high-tech car. And it was just completely through no fault of Ava at all. So it really was unfortunate that it ended her race so early as well. And Matilda had qualified so well. So it was obviously just so unfortunate that her race ended in lap one like it did, especially after a really good race two and a really good race one for the most part. So this crash did bring out a safety car in lap one, which lasted for actually quite a while. I think they had a lot of difficulty clearing the wreckage of the two cars. And that was really unfortunate that this race was spent, a lot of this race was spent under safety car. But I think it's just sometimes these things happen, you know. And I think after that crash, it's worth pointing out the kindness of the high-tech engineers, I would say. Matilda came back to the sort of pit wall that they have. She was quite upset, and one of the engineers sort of stood in front of the camera so that they couldn't live stream to the world, you know, her being upset. And I think that it was weird that the camera went there anyway. Maybe not weird because, you know, you want to see someone post-crash get the reaction, but I think it was really kind of the engineers to stand in front and not let them kind of have that reaction from Matilda because she's a very young girl. She's the wild card. She's had a tough going of the weekend despite showing so much talent. And so I thought that was really kind of them to protect her, even if she's not a full-time member of their team in F1 Academy. So when we finally got racing again, Chloe Chambers actually was having to properly defend her lead because the safety car bunched them all up, and Ella was giving her a run for it. In laps 9, 10, and 11, Ella was really giving Chloe a run for her money and a fight for P1, which I thought was so cool. It was really impressive to see Ella challenge her like that, even if the safety car had given her a bit of an advantage in terms of how far behind she was Chloe. However, eventually another safety car was called because there was sort of a three-way accident between Leah Block, Aurelia Nobles, and Rafaela Ferreira. This did end Aurelia's race, which is so unfortunate. As I mentioned earlier, she's so unlucky with some of these incidents. They seem to keep finding her, and they're pretty much through no fault of her own, but she somehow is always severely impacted by them, and it's just sucks because as a second year, this is her last year, we want to be able to see her do what she can do to impress sponsors, to impress teams, but she's really not been given that chance through very little fault of her own. And so that's just so unfortunate. It's really frustrating to see for her because we want her to have a good, clean race and show what she can do, but she's been hindered so many times. Other incidents we saw was when Gatorman hit Felbermeyer in the hairpin turn. Emma was really giving it her all, really taking the battle to Nina, and it was a shame that happened. I think it was just an accident. Both kind of gave their cases on the radio, but I believe Nina was given a 10-second penalty for that because Emma did spin and lost basically all the positions that she had worked for, so that was definitely frustrating for her. Courtney Crone also spun and went off, which did cause the deployment of a third safety car, and this race, obviously, as I mentioned, was a lot of it was done under safety car. And this actually meant that they ran out of time for the race. A lot of these feeder series, from what I've come to understand, have this model where they race a certain amount of laps or they race to a time limit. So I think that time limit was actually reached. So they had to do the final lap and just end as they did. So yes, this race did just end on timing. But I think it's worth mentioning that Alicia Palmowski, she had that spin at the start that I mentioned. It was a pretty big deal in the moment, but then we had plenty more crashes. Her going off meant that she kind of had to settle for P18 in lap 1 under that safety car. And as I said, most of this race was under safety car, but in the moments that it wasn't, she made her way into the points into P8, which I think is just incredible. She had very limited laps of which she was allowed to actually overtake other girls, and she managed to do it nearly 10 times. Obviously, there were other incidences that she benefited from, but she was able to do it very consistently and make her way into the points after going off the track in a position that left her in P18. And I think that shows just how good she is. I've been kind of joking that she's the next Jamie Chadwick, but she is really so incredibly talented. And it's her rookie year, but she's clearly very experienced and very capable, and she's showing us everything that she's got. And I think, in fact, watching her have such an incredible recovery race also just further showed just how good she is. And it's really special, really exciting to see. So this did end us up with a podium of Chambers P1, Lloyd P2, and Pan P3. I thought that was a really interesting way for the race to end, especially with Ella's really, really strong overtake at the start to sort of make it into P2, and then following a safety car, her ability to take the battle to Chambers. And although she wasn't successful, her competitiveness was really apparent, and it's clear that she has so much talent. And for her to walk away from this weekend, from this round, with a hat trick of podiums, it's just so impressive, and it shows that she is also one of the ones who's clearly going to have a very good career ahead of her. But I think the story from race 3 really was after Chloe Chambers' terrible day prior in race 1 and race 2 on her 21st birthday. On the Sunday, she managed to pull the race win out of the bag, starting from pole, and it was so impressive. It was just lovely to see her win, and I felt she really deserved it coming out of that weekend. And I believe in America, or in North America, it was Father's Day, and her dad was there. I'm going to show some pictures and probably a video too if I have it, but her dad was there at the podium celebrations. He was wearing a shirt that said it said something like, "My daughter is awesome," or "awesome like my daughter." And I thought it was so sweet. He seems like such a sweet guy and just an awesome kind of presence for her in her life. Following on from the Netflix series, we got a little bit of insight into her life, and it seems like her dad is such a supportive part of her network and the people around her. And to see him there, it was so lovely. And he was crying during the podium whilst he was filming her up on the top step. And it was just so sweet. It was so special. I'm literally gonna cry right now just talking about it. And just talking about that, as I mentioned, the stands were practically full for this last race. And despite however many safety cars it had, they were all up on their feet, cheering, clapping for Chloe when she did her sort of cool down lap, and she was waving to them. And it was so special because I just, in my heart, I'm like, this is what F1 Academy deserves. This is what it's meant to be. And it just felt so special that she got all that support for her P1 performance. And yeah, it was so nice to see, even all the way here in Australia at like 1 a.m. when the race was on. So I guess the last thing to talk about now is a bit of team standings, a bit of championship standings. As I've already mentioned, we go into the next round, which is in late August. We go into the next round of F1 Academy with Dorianne in P1, Chloe Chambers in P2, and Maya Verg in P3. So that's quite a shift. And there are some other changes that happen too, but I just want to focus on that top 3. It is obviously upsetting that Maya can't defend her championship lead because of the car issues, but it has happened now, and what we've seen now is Dorianne is leading by quite a convincing margin because of those issues that Chloe Chambers faced as well in the race. But I think it is worth mentioning, from the amount of polls we've seen from Chloe Chambers, that she could very well be the dark horse, and she could very well walk away from this year of F1 Academy as the champion. And I am a Dorianne fan. I've been very open and honest about that. But it is very possible that Chloe Chambers is going to win this. She has just shown something in these last couple of races that shows that she's not to be underestimated. She is an incredible racer, and I think really good things are coming for her. Whether she eventually beats Dorianne or not, the amount of polls she's had, her consistent performances, I think she really is the one to watch, despite me being a huge Dorianne fan. And I think no matter what, those two, Dorianne and Chloe, no matter who actually wins out of the two of them, and maybe even Maya as well, maybe if Maya manages to do a spectacular comeback, whoever wins out of them, they are going to go on and do great things because we have seen spectacular racing from all three already. But with that being said, I am a huge Dorianne fan, and I think that will remain. I will always be rooting for her to win this year because she is my favorite, and that's that, unfortunately. The last thing I wanted to mention, I don't want to go too deep into the team standings like I have done in previous rounds, but I think it is worth mentioning that Prema have overtaken Campos. And it is, if I just want to read it out right now, it's 178 points to 151. I think that's really interesting that they've been able to capitalize off the mistakes that happened between Chloe and Alicia, particularly, I would say, and get their points up really well. I think that Prema have really showed something very special this weekend. And so to see them overtake Campos, and I honestly thought Campos were just going to win the constructors, if you will. I thought they were just going to win just because of how strong and competitive all their drivers are. But Prema overtaking in such a convincing fashion by 27 or so points, I thought that was really, really impressive. And I guess interestingly, MP Motorsports is in P3, Prema's in P1, Maya Berg left Prema for MP Motorsport. I guess it's a little bit interesting. I don't know. I'm really excited to see where she goes. I think she mentioned that she just felt this move would be better for her career in F1 Academy and for her title challenge. And fair enough, she's performing very, very well. She has been, especially before the technical issues this weekend. But I thought, I don't know, I'll stir things up a little bit by mentioning that because Dorian remains with Prema and she is currently leading the F1 Academy Championship for this year. But anyway, there is not much more to say right now except that it is very cold in Australia here right now, so I'm going to go and turn the heater on. But I'm really looking forward to the last 3 rounds of F1 Academy. I want to do a mid-season recap soon so we can just cover everything that's happened so far, just as a nice little summary before we get into the last half of the year and that final battle for the championship. I think it'll be really exciting and I'm very hyped to see what happens next. There's nothing much more to say, but thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.